Okay, here we go. First online lecture. We're going to do 3 things this week. First being human health, which you'll see in this short video. A second being welfare effects, which you'll see a little bit later in the week. And a third part on calculating AQI. So when we're talking about human health, the biggest question is exposure to pollutants. We've already talked so far in class about what the major pollutants are, but how those pollutants affect human health really relies on 2 different questions. And it depends on the pollutant, how long and how strong. So that being, are you exposed to this pollutant for a very long time or a very short time? And how effective is that pollutant? Do you need to be exposed to it for a very long time, or will just a single dose do? And the second and related question is how strong? And again, this goes to the dosage, and that ties back to some of those, the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, or the NAAQS that we talked about earlier in this semester. So there's a couple of terms. Chronic exposure means you've been exposed to it consistently over a longer period of time. Acute conditions are just a short period of time. And both of these, as you've probably guessed by now, are very dependent on local conditions. So we have a couple of things here, right? We talked briefly about the smog in Donora, Pennsylvania, and you'll watch a video on this week about how this happened. So the people who died in this incident, in this inversion event that trapped smog in this small town, it was a lot of smog very quickly. So it was an acute exposure. But the people who were hurt by it had chronic illnesses, or many of the people who were hurt by it had had chronic illnesses previously. This all ties to a lot about what we're hearing right now in the news related to the coronavirus. Epidemiological studies. How do we determine where and when people were exposed? We can also do toxicological studies, which are more chemical, and we also do lab studies on individual pollutant interactions. Okay, so understanding the respiratory system is really important to understanding how how different pollutants, particularly particles, get in and affect us, and the small stuff like viruses, because this is one of the places where exposure happens. And it happens in 3 different parts. The first is the head airways region, or the nasopharyngeal region. That's just the upper part of the respiratory system. This is where you breathe things in, your sinuses, your nasal cavity, in your pharynx and epiglottis. Well, right there where you're the part that you're very aware of. The second part, and that filters out some of the bigger stuff. The second part, or the TBR, the tracheobronchial region, is where we start to exchange oxygen for carbon dioxide. And then the gas exchange region, the really deeper part of the lungs. Here's the TBR. The gas exchange region, the third or deeper part of the lungs, is where we exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide between the lungs and the bloodstream. So anything that gets down here can eventually get into your bloodstream and affect the rest of your body in other ways. The lungs is really this portal of entry. And it has a surface area. This part of the lungs, the GER, has a surface area of 75 meters squared. Imagine that. Look at the space you're in right now. I don't know where you are, but I'm in a 8 by 10 bedroom, 8 foot by 10 foot bedroom. 75 square meters is a lot larger than that. It has a very large surface to volume area. What else do I want to tell you about this? There are a lot of little branchings. So for reference, that 75 meters squared is approximately half of a tennis court. And as you go deeper in the system, the diameter and the length of all of the airway branches decrease in smaller and smaller. So the diameter and the length decrease and the number of them gets bigger, kind of like a tree. So as that space gets smaller, there's a decreasing velocity and an increasing residence time. And that starts to have an impact on the effective mechanisms that are responsible for deposition. We do have some, let me show you this, what that looks like in there. So there's veins and these little sacs where particulates and air gets in and exchanges that oxygen into the rest of your bloodstream. We do have some natural protection mechanisms in the head airways and the lung airways. We have mucus in there, and there's ciliary action that we subconsciously swallow some stuff that goes into our GI tract. It can get out the bigger deposited stuff that's inhaled air. That's low doses, so short-term exposure stuff. Through sneezing or coughing, we can accelerate that. If the doses are really high, if there's too much of it, we don't get that stuff out and it can get down. This lower region, all these alveolar region, does not have any of that mucus in there because by nature it's designed for gas exchange. So anything that's insoluble can be engulfed by the little parts and the lymph nodes in your lungs, although it can take months or years to clear them out. So the deeper it gets, the longer it stays because of the less physical mechanism where things have. This is the region where viruses like to reside, and it's also the target regions for therapeutic aerosol delivery. So as in the medical profession, we use we take advantage of that inability to push stuff out and keep it and want to keep it in there. So it's a great way for getting medicines in there. But from a pollutant standpoint, it's not something that we like. All right, so I'm just going to talk briefly about a couple of the criteria air pollutants. When we talk about respiratory sides of things, it's really particulate matter that makes a difference. So what you just saw is that our respiratory system is essentially a filter. So mechanisms involved in filtration, the physical mechanisms of particulates that we talked about a little bit earlier in the semester, the aerodynamic properties and the physiological behavior, the size, shape, and how things move and how things join together make a difference here. And anything that you get into your system has two possible fates. It's either filtered out or it's impacted. So there's different mechanisms here. Something can go straight to a collector where it's intercepted and impacts on the collector. It can go through a diffusion process. It can go through gravitational setting. There's a lot of different methods of deposition. And I will put some links in Blackboard about the different ways that those happen. For your purposes, I want you to understand that things can impact, settle, diffuse, or be intercepted in the air in your respiratory system. Okay. This is a question: which mechanisms will work better for larger particles and for smaller particles? This is a question you're going to answer either in the discussion board or on homework number 6. Okay, so bringing this back to our earlier discussion about particle size distributions and the size and the varying atmospheric effects on different particles, those effects also are different within the different areas of the respiratory system. So what you see here, you can see particle diameter along the x-axis and deposition fraction along the y-axis. And if you look at the total deposition, you see a dip between 0.1 and 1 micrometer. So a lot of stuff in this very, very fines is deposited, and then some of the bigger stuff is deposited. But if we break it down by the different regions of the respiratory system, the head airways here, the upper respiratory tract here in green, that dip is wider, and the tracheobronchial here in the blue, it's the smaller stuff tend to deposit there, and then in the deep lungs, the GER region, the big stuff doesn't really get down there, but this 0.01 to 0.1 region is the most dangerous. So the different ways, the different particle sizes come in different ways. PM 2.5 is mostly removed by settling and impaction in the head area, the head airways, and diffusion plays a much larger role for the small particles in all regions. So there is different mechanisms in these different regions. I'm just going to talk briefly about the other criteria of pollutants. Most of what we just talked about, I was referring to particulates or solids that get in the lungs and get out through these settling mechanisms. But remember, our other criteria pollutants are gases or other different chemical structures. So we've talked both about gas and solid particulates. The gases, they are with the air. They are part of the air that you're breathing. So they get down deep into the lower respiratory system and transfer into your blood system. So carbon monoxide is one of them. And it is a concern because it gets into your bloodstream, it reacts with the hemoglobin in your blood and forms some other chemicals that then prevents the oxygen transfer into your blood. So it has toxic effects on humans. Lead, as you see here in this image from the Queensland government, lead coming out of the tailpipes. We talked a little bit about this lead pollution as well. Lead can get deep in your lungs in its gaseous form. It's a neurotoxin. And doesn't do great things for your body either. It can be absorbed directly into the blood. It goes through similar in the processes that you absorb calcium, and it can damage your organs, kidney, liver, brain, reproductive systems, and even cause osteoporosis. So these things get into your blood a little bit more efficiently. There are other classes of pollutants, which we've also discussed. Another group of hazardous air pollutants are dioxins, sometimes referred to which are chemicals that come from, I'm just going to talk about it's a generic term for several chemicals that are highly persistent. So mercury can be inhaled in its vapor form, generally from burning chlorine. These compounds, hydrocarbon, your bloodstream, from a lot of different nervous systems, industrial activities, your respiratory like waste system, your kidneys, like that, and they can be very harmful and your in varying doses, depending on there's a lot of they are emitted and your exposure. Dangerous things that can happen from mercury and some of the other compounds that contain mercury with them. Another group of aerosols, subgroup in the aerosol context, are called bioaerosols. And bioaerosols are any aerosols with an organic origin. So some of these things are pollen, dander, insect poop, sea salt, anything that comes from nature. Some of them are still living, microorganisms. They come from the aerosolization of organic material through coughing, sneezing, winds, waves, wastewater treatment plants like you see here, as that is all, the wastewater is treated in those areas and it's all bubbled over. Some small solid aerosols come up into the atmosphere. And they all have health effects with them. Some of you are very familiar with pollen and allergies, all the way to death from pathogenic organisms. So there's a wide variety of things here, and I realize this is a very sensitive topic with what's going on around in the world right now. What I want you to take away from this is that bioaerosols exist. There are many of them. We could probably teach a whole class on each individual bioaerosol and all the different ways that it reacts. They come from all different places. And they're a big player in indoor air quality too. Things like ventilation systems where you have moist ductwork, recycled air systems. Once they're in there, they just keep getting recycled around. Office buildings, something known as sick building syndrome. And they also are used in biological warfare, such as anthrax and incidents that we had in the past. Finally, in terms of health effects, there are a number of indirect health effects from air pollution. As with many of the things we've talked about in this class, the effect isn't just a simple cause and effect. It's a cause that causes other things to occur that leads to a final effect. So, for example, climate change is one of these major effects. Air pollution is part of the atmosphere. The climate is changing. How pollutants interact with the climate, how pollutants interact with the atmosphere is going to change. The number of pollutants we put in will change the climate. There's a feedback going on there. That's all. You can take climatology courses if you want some of that information. But changing the climate changes how we as humans are exposed to the atmosphere in regional weather changes, heat waves, extreme weather, temperature, precipitation, sea level rise. And we know that in hotter times, our exposure to different pollutants may affect our health differently. This can also lead to microbial changes in the contamination paths and the way that pollutants are transmitted and the transmission dynamics within the system. And it also will lead to changes in agroecosystems, hydrology, changes in our agroecosystems or our agricultural systems will change the way pollutants are emitted, as food production is one of our big sources. It'll also lead to changes in socioeconomic and demographics, so where people are. And if you go back to that initial how long, how strong, if you move around in your lifetime and you're exposed to certain pollutants when you're young and different pollutants when you're older, or no pollutants when you're young and different pollutants when you're older, your socioeconomic and your demographics in terms of epidemiology are all changed as well. Now, there'll be some modulating influences on this, some positive and negative feedbacks, but the end result will be some changes in health effects, such as temperature-related illness and death and illness due to extreme weather-related changes, air pollution-related health effects, water and foodborne diseases may change, vector-borne diseases and rodent-borne diseases. If you change the climate, you change where these animals can live. If you change where mosquitoes are happy, you can change the transmission rate for malaria. So air pollution has caused a change in malaria. Effects of food and water shortages, and then all of the other mental, nutritional, and infectious disease impacts that this may have. Chronic stress due to exposure to hot temperatures, exposure to extreme events, all of these things impact people's mental health. And so there are a lot of these indirect effects. Okay, finishing up here with a summary slide. Use this in your homework as you're thinking about which pollutant affects which part of the body and which are the primary effects are listed here. There are potential effects of the mixture. So if you live in an area that has both bad ozone and bad sulfur dioxide, you may have respiratory functions, but then also get some other heart effects or pulmonary effects from particulate matter because the sulfur dioxide contributes to particulate. So no one simple, this causes this situation. And then finally, carbon dioxide and carbon particles will affect climate and resulting health effects of that. Okay, I think I've talked for long enough. I hope you've stayed with me this long. I will try to be briefer and a little better prepared for the next one, but we're all learning as we go. On to homework number 6 for you. Have a great day.